Nothing was ever going to live up to PT. It was too brilliant, too snake-bitten, too perfect a sacrifice. We all knew it, but we all also knew that that wouldn't stop people from trying. Most imposters were easily recognized. I've seen a dozen photorealistic haunted house simulators on Steam, each one more desperate than the last. The key to PT's success was ethereal. It was the misty no man's land between shocking, obtuse, sinister, and absurd. Without proper insight and discipline, the new versions would unknowingly drift too far into the dark. A few projects seemed to pass the eye test, initially. Allison Road's demo trailer was sleek, uncanny. It seemed quiet in all the right ways, but vastly overpromised, and was never close to being released. Infliction was well made and cinematic, but leaned too hard on middle school idealizations of what horror should be. Layers of Fear was the entire circus. I expected this. I'm gonna date this video and quote Spider-Man, but if you expect disappointment, you'll never be disappointed. I allowed myself one delusion, however, a perfidious, skin-chilling exploration of hardwood and hopeless hallway. I knew it wouldn't be PT, but maybe it would be scary? Let's talk about Visage. Sad Square first began work on Visage in 2015. They had a successful Kickstarter campaign and went on Steam Greenlight as well. A demo was released in October of 2018, and after a few delays, the game was released on Steam on October 30th, 2020. The third most haunted day of the year, behind Halloween, of course, and Groundhog's Day, where the ghost of Puxatawny Phil terrorizes every New Yorker who voted for Bill de Blasio. Sad Square made it no mystery that this game was inspired by PT. Quotes about its influence are all over the press kit. I've said a lot to make you think that this game was totally derivative, but what the studio was doing was brave. PT was successful, but there was also no game quite like it. This genre, whatever we end up calling it, psychological haunted house horror or something, is in its infancy. The branches could go in an infinite number of directions. The alpha gameplay trailer that was released in 2016 was what got me hooked. It was super referential, sure, but it felt like they knew what made a scary game. It felt in touch, loved, cerebral. The monsters weren't super obvious, and the scares were peripheral. It had the nonsensical home design, with disappearing entranceways and impossible corridors. It had an interesting and uncanny environment. But most importantly, it seemed to have restraint. I made sure not to play the demo. I wanted the final, fully realized package. No excuses. Put that Kickstarter money to work. I did, however, make sure to check out some reviews and talk to some friends who were playing the demo version of the game. From what I understand, the portions of the game playable in early access were 2 chapters, Lucy and Dolores, and they were basically the same as the version that was released in the final game. Visage was receiving near universal praise. Everyone I saw was commending the game's haunting atmosphere, its clever puzzle design, and most importantly, its horror tact. The game was scary. I was beyond excited when I first downloaded it. I think, in retrospect, the most powerful factor of my anticipation, more than all the evidence, was that I wanted the game to be good. I should have learned this lesson already. Don't get on the hype train. Judge a game by its merits alone. I was sure I had felt this before, but I guess I needed to feel it again. I went to therapy for the first time as an adult a few years ago. It was extremely helpful, and I continue to use lessons from those sessions in my everyday life. Much of the time was spent identifying feelings, saying them out loud, and then trying to trace the cord back to the wall, find out where they came from. I remember vividly, at the end of a session, we'd been digging deep, and my therapist asks me, "What makes you the most happy?" I turned off my brain, and I searched through the darkness of my mind, and I said, being nice. What a dumb thing to say, right? But I still can't think of a more honest answer. Whether the situation warrants it or not, my default tools of interaction are praise and commendation. In the context of Visage, of this video, I say this to bring credibility to a statement I'm going to make. I'm going to be mean to this game. Not because I find pleasure in it, but because I need to be honest with myself. What are some things PT did really well? It is the mother of this genre. I think it's fair to say that points of emphasis for that game are trying to be reproduced here in Visage. I would say a mostly understated and eerie atmosphere, judicious and potent use of scares, puzzles that are unconventional but intuitive, and a sparse narrative that gives only essence and suggestion. Visage fails at delivering on each of these components. To make this easier on me, I'm going to make this a compliment sandwich, but one with really, really thin pieces of bread, like those sandwich thins. Of all the PT-inspired games that have come out in the last 5 years, I think Visage is the best one. It tries the hardest, and I think Sad Square really loved this game. It is the most complete, well-rounded, and evocative. There, that felt good. Now let's rip this apart. Visage has one of the most bizarre and confounding intros that I have ever seen in a video game. First off, when you start a new game, you are taken to a warning screen that reads, "Visage is hard. Patience, thorough investigation, and good resource management are your best friends. Good luck." This is so ballsy that I thought it was actually pretty endearing. After this, you watch a scene where a ghost, or something, very slowly loads a revolver with 6 bullets while seated in a concrete basement. As you do this, you can hear some muffled panting and grunting. After loading the weapon, you turn to see a woman and 2 children tied to chairs and gagged. You then, very slowly, blast each one in the face. No obfuscation, no clever camera work. You see the bullet rip right through each of their foreheads. You then turn your no-handed gun on yourself and turn the wall of the basement into a Jackson Pollock painting. To quote the best YouTuber ever, Steak Bentley, there's a lot that immediately registers as completely ridiculous here.
This sets the tone for me. This is the complete opposite of that scene from Silent Hill 3 where Heather comes home and finds her dad dead in the chair. If I had any notion that this game would be elusive or subtle, that was gone. This intro tells me that this game is going to take itself more seriously than that JROTC kid from high school who would wear his dress blues to the football games. Also, love how he loaded 6 bullets into the revolver when he only needed 4. How embarrassing would that be if you missed a shot? Ugh. Sorry, Timmy, let's try that again.
The very next scene, we wake up in a blank, windowless room and walk out the only door. This feels very familiar. You then start the game proper. Visage is unique in the way it structures its gameplay. There isn't a typical story structure. Instead, there are a few items you can interact with to begin chapters. These chapters can begin in any order, but the agreed upon intended order is Lucy, Dolores, then Raykin. You can explore the house and do some other small puzzles and collect items and stuff. I kinda like this. I think it ultimately doesn't work out here, and the end of the game lacks a climax, but I appreciate them doing something different. When you do start a chapter, you are directed to some certain room or object, and you begin learning the story of the previous person or family who lived in this house. It's implied that you are, or were, the most recent family to live here, and your violent fate was not the first to be realized. See, the house is haunted. Let's talk about the house. I think it looks good. They got that authentic, a family lives here vibe down. It's fun looking at the family photos and knickknacks on the shelf and the interdimensional Matryoshka dolls. The issue, game-wise, is that there's no room for the atmosphere to linger. You are berated by hauntings, little carnival sideshow effects that are desperately trying to get your attention. Lights are shutting off, doors are closing for no reason, someone is constantly gasping for air right in my ear. It's incessant. Nearly every review of this game praises its classic survival horror atmosphere and dread. I feel like I'm going crazy. This is one of the most cluttered horror games I've ever played. As a consequence, the game is rarely scary. This inky grandpa is not a trepidatious, skulking predator. He's a friendly neighbor. I see this dude around all the time. How are the kids? You ever get that rash checked out? I'm scared of this thing once, but after the 40th time, it's just exhausting. I think when Visage is trying to be scary, it fails. The treehouse, the spooky paintings you can see with the camera, the circle of mirrors, these planned sections all fall flat. The times in the game where I am actually feeling uneasy are those uncommon moments of silence and contemplation. While we're on the planned scariness of the game, let's talk about these monsters. These are awful, right? Am I being too harsh? They are so over the top. Like, if Lisa is Charizard, then Baby Doll Blade Hands is Kyurem White. There's just too much. I feel like every design should be dialed down like 4 notches, and should feel like they're relevant to the aesthetics of the game. I get Lucy, but every other stalking monster just doesn't make sense to me, and it really pulls me out of what is otherwise a pretty realistic game, design-wise.
It's like if Abe from Clone High wasn't a teenage human boy and instead a Gundam. Like, yeah, you couldn't watch the show the whole time. You'd be like, why is that dude a Gundam? Like,
Speaking of game aesthetics, let's address the narrative profile. As expected, Visage's story uses PT as a template, but it's like when you try to trace a panel from One Piece and it ends up looking like you did it well on Colossus.
this is Sad Square's first game, and it doesn't look like any of the leads had substantial game production experience. This makes a lot of the game more impressive, to be honest, but if we are judging this equitably, there are problems whose solutions are almost certainly overambition and lack of required tools.
The little dialogue there is poorly written. Listen to this call from your neighbor, Rose.
Hello, Dwayne. It's Rose, your neighbor. I know it's late, and I know that I tend to be a little anxious about small things. I apologize for that, but I'm getting a bit worried. I haven't seen you out of the house in about 3 weeks. Is everything all right? Could you call me just to let me know everything's fine? All right. Bye-bye.
Just so expository. I honestly would have thought this was a joke if the rest of the writing wasn't also like this. The rest of the story is pretty lackluster. We are learning about the lives of the other 3 subjects who lived in this house, and while the personalities and events in each of their stories are pretty clear, it's difficult to see the importance they have in relation to each other. There's a pretty prominent theory that Dwayne, the player character, was somehow involved in MK Ultra, and the previous inhabitants of the house are all people who inadvertently suffered by Dwayne's hands.
If that's true, fine. Whatever, honestly. I feel like it's pretty unsatisfactory and takes away some of the humanity of the game, but at least it would create some kind of connection. While playing this, I felt like these were tales in a horror anthology, mostly unrelated campfire stories.
Like I said previously, the gameplay is divided up into 4 chapters. Each one is linear, and each element is carefully designed for you to experience in a certain way. There are a few deviations and random events, but by and large, these are scare mazes. Game design is a much more complex and academic thing than it's often given credit for. Video games are still breaking out of the stigma of being children's play, but the planning and detail put into designing something as simple as a flickering light at the end of a hallway is immense. Level design is its own language, one that I'm not sure I noticed until I was fluent. Mastery of this language is especially important for a game like Visage. The player is constantly going to be thinking, what should I do next? And a good game answers that question for you with subtlety and conviction. It should feel almost unconscious, like you thought of walking a certain direction or opening a door all on your own. I think this is where Visage has its most fundamental issue. Not because it's bad, but because it's so close to being good. The puzzles in this game are a toxic combination of too vague to be instinctual and not clever enough to be worth it. I feel like this is true for most of the game, but let's take a look at one specific example. In the 4th chapter of this game, you need to collect pieces of a mirror mask. This task is aided by watching some VHS tapes scattered around the house. One such tape is the prison tape. Sometime after watching, you are transported to a separate maze. There's one bleak hallway with several corridors branching off its sides. After walking down to the end and grabbing the sledgehammer, almost all of the lights go out, and you begin to hear the anguish and slop of a stalking monster. You were left with the knowledge of those corridors, each of which ends with a brick wall, your new sledgehammer, and a distant noise, a deep, droning voice. Great setup here. Our visibility is compromised, so we instinctively start to search for non-vision-based clues. Following the sound and making sure to use the few light bulbs we have left to keep our sanity up, we move to the first corridor on the right. After slowly approaching the brick wall, we use the tool provided for this puzzle, the sledgehammer, to break down the wall and get to this sound. We find that the voice is coming from a radio locked behind a grate. We cannot interact with it, but in this room we can finally make out what the broadcast is saying. They are a string of words on a loop. Some typical and kind, like smile and party, and others sanguine, like suffocate and torture. I could feel a flicker in my eye. This is like that baby monitor puzzle, I thought, but hopefully less obvious. I let myself become excited by this intriguing trailhead. I went and checked the other corridors, listening carefully for any more cues. Each hallway was silent. I swung my hammer and felled the remaining walls, each with their own simple, static items. Nothing was clicking. How does that radio relate? What puzzle do I need to solve here? I went back to the radio and wrote down each word that was spoken into a nearby notebook, examining the cipher for any message at all. Did the first letters of each word spell anything? What about just the first letters of the negative words? Maybe something about the number of the letters in each word? Or maybe it's something about the amount of syllables, like it's binary. I felt like a kid again. How long had it been since I had to break out my notebook to solve a puzzle for a game? This was the most invigorated I'd felt in the entire playthrough. I spent maybe 20 minutes reading and rereading and rereading, trying desperately to do this myself. I was getting nothing. Determined to redeem this game, I walked back out to the hallway to examine everything more closely, to try and pry every last possible clue out of this labyrinth. I walked up to the wall where I retrieved the sledgehammer and noticed a shimmering spot on the white brick, and approaching, I pulled the piece out and the wall collapsed, allowing me to return to the house. If I had any legs, they would be totally broken. So, what? What happened? How did I solve this? In order to get the mirror mask shard, which ends the puzzle, you just need to knock down all 4 walls with the sledgehammer. The radio is nothing. Nothing that I can parse or find in research or online. I can't find a single reason for the inclusion of the radio, even as just an Easter egg. What are we doing here? It seems like Sad Square just accidentally created one of the most engaging puzzles in their game. This moment was a microcosm of my feelings about Visage as a whole. I came in willing and excited, giving the game every opportunity to amaze me and confirm my bias. But it stumbled with every step, and didn't give me anything that I could love. There are some other smaller things I could address, but I don't think it's necessary. I'd love to talk more in the comments, see what you all think. I'm okay with being wrong on this. I know Visage is a pretty beloved game, and I absolutely do not want to take that away from anyone. I can't take that away from you, right? Your experience has far more value to you than mine, some stranger. I think I just needed to get this out. Say my piece. Like delivering a eulogy for a wicked family member. I admired them, but it was hard. It took a lot of patience and willpower, and sometimes I thought they lived their life with the sole purpose of spiting me. But I know now that all they did was the best that they could. Same as me. And after speaking that truth, I am healed. I hope you felt something. This is Halloch, signing off.